The planet was called Vera Prime. It was a small, quiet world at the edge of known space. The sky was pale blue. The oceans were calm. The people who lived there were called the Verans. They were peaceful. They did not fight wars. They did not build weapons. For 300 years they had lived in peace. On this morning, the sun rose slowly over the capital city. Children played in the streets. Farmers worked in the fields. Old men sat outside their homes and talked about small things, the weather, the harvest, old stories. Nobody thought anything bad would happen today, but far above the planet in the cold silence of space, something was moving. A massive fleet was crossing the border of Veran space. The ships were dark and sharp, shaped like knives. They moved without sound. They moved without warning. This was the fleet of the Korlath Empire, a name that made every peaceful species in the galaxy shake with fear. The Korlath did not ask questions. They did not offer peace. They came to take. Planets that resisted were destroyed. Planets that surrendered became slaves. There was no third choice. Inside the Vera Prime Defense Station, a young officer named Ren sat at his monitor. He was 22 years old. He had never seen a real battle in his life. His job was simple: watch the radar, report anything strange, and go home for dinner. Today, the radar showed something strange. At first, it was just a small dot. Ren blinked and looked closer. The dot did not move like a normal ship. It was too fast. Too many of them, appearing one by one. That's not possible," Ren whispered. He pressed a button. An alarm began to ring through the station. Within seconds, the ringing spread through the entire city. Loud, sharp, terrifying. People stopped walking. Children stopped playing. Everyone looked up at the sky, confused. They had never heard this sound before. Nobody had ever needed to hear it. At the top of the defense station, an old man named Director Halvin ran into the control room. He was the leader of Vera Prime's small government. His hands were shaking as he looked at the screen. "How many ships?" he asked. Ren's voice cracked. 50, maybe more. "Sir, they're Korlath." The room went silent. Everyone knew what that name meant. Director Halvin closed his eyes for a moment. He had heard stories about the Korlath since he was a child. Stories about entire cities burned in a single night. Stories about screams that could be heard from orbit. He had always believed those stories happened to other people, on other planets, far away. Now the monster was at his own front door. "Sir, what do we do?" Ren asked. His voice was small, like a child asking his father for help. Halvin looked around the room. Old scanners, broken defense systems that had not been used in decades. 3 small patrol ships, built only to stop pirates, not an empire. "We have nothing," Halvin said quietly. "We have no fleet, no weapons, no army." "Then we surrender?" another officer asked. Halvin shook his head slowly. "The Korlath do not take surrender. They take everything." The room fell into heavy silence. Everyone understood now. There was no escape, no fight to win, no enemy to defeat with strength they did not have. But Director Halvin was not ready to give up completely. There was one more thing he could try. A small hope. A very small one. "Get me the deep space communicator," he said. The deep space communicator was an old device, rarely used. It was built many years ago, when Vera Prime first joined a small trade network with other planets. It could send a signal far across the galaxy, but there was no guarantee anyone would hear it. No guarantee anyone would answer. No guarantee anyone would even care. Still, it was the only hope they had. Halvin sat down in front of the communicator. His hands trembled as he pressed the button to record a message. Outside through the window, he could already see bright lights in the sky. The Korlath fleet, entering the atmosphere. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "This is Director Halvin of Vera Prime. We are a peaceful world. We have no army, no weapons. A Korlath fleet has entered our system and will attack within hours. We are begging. Anyone who can hear this message, please help us. We do not want to die. We do not want our children to die. Please. If anyone is out there, please help. He stopped talking. His voice broke at the end. He looked at Ren, who was standing beside him, tears in his eyes. Send it, Halvin said. Send it to every frequency, every direction, anyone. Ren's fingers moved across the controls. The message was sent, not to one destination, but scattered in every direction, like a bottle thrown into an endless ocean, hoping that somewhere, someone would find it. Far away, in the black emptiness of deep space, the message traveled. It passed dead stars. It passed empty planets. It passed places where no living thing had ever set foot. Days passed. No answer came. On Vera Prime, the situation grew worse by the hour. The Korlath fleet did not attack immediately. Instead, they circled the planet slowly, like a predator studying its prey before the final strike. This was their way. They enjoyed the fear. They wanted the people below to feel the weight of what was coming. Inside the capital city, panic began to spread. People filled the streets, trying to find shelter, though there was no real shelter from a fleet like this. Parents held their children close. Some prayed to gods they had almost forgotten. Others simply sat in silence waiting. Ren stood at his monitor every hour, watching, hoping for a response to their message. Nothing came. Static, empty space, silence. Maybe no one heard it, he said one night, exhausted, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Director Halvin placed a hand on his shoulder. Maybe, he said, but we still have a little time before they attack. Keep watching. On the fourth day, everything changed. Ren was half asleep at his station when a soft beeping sound woke him. He looked at the screen, confused. A new signal was coming in and not going out but coming in. Someone had answered. "Sir," Ren shouted. "Sir, wake up, something's responding." Director Halvin rushed into the room, his robe still messy from sleep. He leaned over the monitor. The signal was strange. Not words, not a normal message, just a set of numbers, coordinates, and a short string of text underneath. Halvin read it aloud, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Stay calm, help is coming." Nobody in the room moved. Nobody breathed. For a moment they thought it might be a trick, maybe the Korlath themselves, playing with their fear. But the coordinates were coming from a direction far outside Korlath territory, from a place almost nobody in this part of the galaxy dared to speak about. That's... Ren's voice trailed off. He looked at the star charts on the side screen, then back at the coordinates. His face went pale. "Sir, those coordinates," he said slowly. "They're coming from human space." The room went cold. Every species in this part of the galaxy knew about humans, not because they had met them personally, but because of the stories. Old stories, frightening stories, stories told in whispers, passed from one generation to another, like a warning. Humans were not known for being kind. They were not known for being gentle. They were known as survivors. A species that had clawed its way through disaster after disaster, and somehow always came out the other side, stronger and more dangerous than before. Long ago there had been a great war. Details were unclear, buried under decades of rumor and fear, but everyone agreed on one thing: an empire far more powerful than the Korlath had once tried to conquer human space. That empire no longer existed. Nobody knew exactly what happened, but the stars in that old empire's territory were said to be silent now, empty, dead. Since then, most species avoided human space entirely. Trade ships took longer routes just to stay away from it. Diplomats spoke carefully when the topic came up, as if saying the wrong word might summon something terrible. And now that same species, and the one everyone feared, the one everyone avoided, had answered Vera Prime's cry for help. "This can't be good," an officer whispered. Director Halvin stared at the message on the screen, his mind racing. Was this rescue? Or was this an even bigger disaster than the one already waiting outside their planet? He did not have time to decide, because at that exact moment, alarms began ringing again, different alarms this time. new signals appearing on the radar, coming fast, coming from the same direction as the message. "Sir!" Ren shouted, his eyes wide. "Ships! New ships! Entering the system!" Everyone rushed to the window. Far above Vera Prime, past the slow-circling Korlath fleet, tiny lights began appearing in the black sky. 1, then 5, then dozens. The Korlath fleet, which had been calmly circling the planet like a predator with all the time in the world, suddenly stopped moving. For the first time since they arrived, the Korlath commanders hesitated. Nobody on Vera Prime knew what these new ships were. Nobody knew if they had come to save the planet or to finish whatever the Korlath had started. Director Halvin stood frozen, staring at the screen, his heart pounding. "Who are they?" he whispered. Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. All they could do now was watch and wait as the galaxy's most feared and most mysterious species arrived at their dying world. The lights in the sky grew brighter with every passing minute. What had started as a few small dots on the radar screen was now a clear picture. Dozens of ships, moving in a tight, disciplined formation. They did not rush. They did not scatter. They moved like a single body, calm and controlled, cutting through space with quiet confidence. Inside the defense station, nobody spoke. Ren stood frozen at his monitor, his eyes fixed on the screen. Director Halvin stood beside him, his hands gripping the edge of the desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. "They're not attacking the Korlath," an officer said, breaking the silence. "They're just sitting there, watching." It was true. The new fleet had stopped at the edge of the system, far enough from both Vera Prime and the Korlath ships. They were not hiding. They wanted to be seen, but they were not moving closer either. "What are they waiting for?" Ren whispered. Nobody answered. Because deep down, everyone in that room already knew the truth. The humans were not in a hurry. They had never been in a hurry. That was part of what made them so frightening. To understand why the entire room was holding its breath, one must understand the stories the Verans had grown up with. Stories about humans were not told the way stories about other feared species were told. Other species, pirates, raiders, small empires like the Korlath, were feared because they were cruel. Their cruelty was loud. It was visible. Everyone knew what they wanted, and everyone knew what they were capable of. Humans were different. Humans were feared because nobody truly understood them. Long before Ren was born, long before Director Halvin was even a young man, there had existed a powerful empire called the Threshen Dominion. The Threshen were not like the Korlath. They did not simply raid small planets. They conquered entire star systems, absorbing every world they touched into their growing empire. For hundreds of years, no one had been able to stop them. Every species that resisted was crushed. Every fleet that challenged them was destroyed. The Threshen Dominion seemed unstoppable, a wall of iron and fire that spread further every year. Then one day the Threshen Dominion made a mistake. They found a small, quiet species living on a single blue-green planet at the edge of the galaxy. A species with no advanced fleet, no powerful weapons, no allies among the stars. On paper, this species should have been the easiest conquest the Dominion had ever attempted. That species was humanity. The full details of what happened next were never clearly known outside human space. The stories varied depending on who was telling them. Some said the humans fought a defensive war for nearly 2 decades, refusing to surrender no matter how much they lost. Others said the humans did not fight fair, that they used tactics considered unthinkable by other species, striking not just military targets, but supply lines, infrastructure, anything that weakened the enemy, no matter the cost. Still others whispered that the war ended not because the humans won a final grand battle, but because the Threshen Dominion, one system at a time, simply stopped existing. What was agreed upon by nearly everyone in the galaxy was this: the Threshen Dominion no longer existed. Its home systems were listed on old star charts as empty, quiet, and avoided. And humanity, the species that should have been an easy conquest, remained. Since that war, Humans rarely expanded beyond their own borders. They did not build a large empire. They did not seek to rule over other species. Most of the galaxy assumed this was because humans were satisfied with what they had. A smaller number of people, the ones who studied history carefully, believed something different. They believed humans stayed quiet because the war had cost them more than anyone admitted, and they believed that if humans were ever provoked again, the entire galaxy would learn exactly why the Threshen Dominion had disappeared. Nobody wanted to test that theory. Back on Vera Prime, Director Halvin finally broke the silence in the control room. "Open a channel," he said, "to the human fleet." Ren looked at him unsure. "Sir, are you sure? What if—" "We are already going to die if nobody does anything," Halvin said, his voice steady despite the fear behind it. "Open the channel." Ren's hands moved across the console. It took a moment for the signal to connect. When it finally did, a small screen flickered to life on the main display. There was no picture, only a calm, steady voice. "This is Commander Voss, of the Human Border Fleet. We received your distress signal 4 days ago." The voice was not loud, it was not angry, it was simply calm. A calmness that somehow felt more unsettling than shouting would have. Director Halvin stepped forward, trying to keep his own voice steady. "Commander Voss, thank you for answering. We are a peaceful people. We have no fleet, no weapons capable of defending against the Korlath. We did not know if anyone would even hear our message." "We heard it," Voss replied simply. "That is why we are here." "Are you here to help us?" Halvin asked. He hesitated before continuing. "Or are you here for something else?" There was a pause on the line. For a moment, Halvin feared he had offended the commander, that his question, driven by centuries of fear and rumor, might turn this rescue into something worse. But when Voss spoke again, his voice held no anger, only a quiet, tired understanding, as if he had heard this same question many times before, from many other frightened people. "I understand your fear," Voss said. "You have heard stories about us. Most of them are probably not kind. I will not waste time trying to convince you those stories are false. Instead, I will tell you this. We are here because you asked for help, and no one else answered. What happens next depends on what the Korlath decide to do." Halvin exchanged a glance with Ren. Neither of them knew what to say. "You should know," Voss continued, "that we did not come to fight for glory or to conquer your world or to take anything from you. We came because a message reached us that said children were in danger. That is enough reason for us." For the first time in days, something inside Director Halvin's chest loosened, just slightly. It was not full relief, not yet, but it was something close to hope. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you, Commander Voss. Do not thank me yet," Voss replied. "The Korlath fleet has not left, and they will not leave simply because we have arrived. Prepare your people. Move as many as you can to shelter. This is not over." The channel closed, high above the planet, aboard the lead human ship. The atmosphere was very different from the panic below on Vera Prime. The ship was called the Ashfall, a long, dark vessel built for endurance rather than appearance. Inside its command deck, Commander Voss stood in front of a large holographic display showing the positions of both fleets, the Korlath ships circling slowly, and his own fleet holding steady at the edge of the system. Beside him stood a younger officer named Lieutenant Mira Chen, watching the same display with a tense expression. "Sir, the Korlath aren't moving," she said. "Do you think they'll back down?" Voss did not answer immediately. He studied the Korlath formation carefully, noting the way their ships were positioned, not retreating, but not attacking either. "No," he said finally. "They're deciding whether we're worth the risk." "And are we?" Mira asked. A faint, humorless smile crossed Voss's face. "That depends on how much they remember." Mira frowned. "Remember what, sir?" Voss turned to face her fully. "Every species out here has heard some version of the story about the Threshen War. Most of them think it's exaggeration, legend, a story grown bigger with every retelling." He paused. "The Korlath are more dangerous than most, but they're also smarter than most. smart enough to know that legends usually come from somewhere real. Mira was quiet for a moment. So they're afraid of us. They're afraid of the idea of us, Voss corrected. That's different from being afraid of what we can actually do. If they believe the legend, they'll leave. If they decide to test it, he did not finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Behind them, a communications officer spoke up. Sir, we're picking up movement. The Korlath fleet. They're repositioning. Voss turned back to the display. The Korlath ships, which had been circling calmly, were now shifting into a different formation, a tighter, more aggressive shape. They're not leaving, Mira said quietly. No, Voss agreed. They're testing us. Down on Vera Prime, word of the conversation between Director Halvan and Commander Voss spread quickly through the capital. Some people felt hope for the first time in days. Others felt a new kind of fear, trading one unknown threat for another. In a small home near the edge of the city, a woman named Kessa held her young son close as she listened to the news broadcast repeating Halvan's message. Humans had answered their call and were now positioned above the planet facing the Korlath fleet directly. Are they going to save us, Mama? Her son asked, his small voice trembling. Kessa did not know how to answer honestly. She had heard the same stories everyone else had heard, stories about humans that were terrifying rather than comforting. But she had also heard something else in Halvan's voice on the broadcast, a small note of hope that had not been there in days. I don't know, she said finally, holding her son tighter. But someone came. That has to mean something. Outside, the sky above Vera Prime had grown strange. Two fleets unmoving faced each other in silence, one representing the horror the planet had expected, the other representing an unknown that could be salvation or something far worse. Back in the defense station, Ren stood watching the radar screen, his exhaustion from days of sleepless waiting temporarily forgotten. Every eye in the room was fixed on the same image, the Korlath fleet's new, tighter formation. Sir, Ren said, his voice tight, the Korlath ships are moving closer to the human fleet. Director Halvan stepped closer to the screen. His earlier moment of hope now mixed again with dread. Are they attacking? Not yet, Ren said. But they're closing the distance. Fast. On the human channel, still open in the background, they could hear brief, calm exchanges between officers aboard the Ashfall, voices that remained steady even as the threat grew closer. They're testing, they heard Commander Voss say to someone on his own bridge. Hold formation. Do not fire first. And if they do fire first? A voice on the human side asked. There was a pause. Then Voss's calm, quiet answer came through the channel, heard clearly by everyone listening on Vera Prime. Then we remind them why the stars in Threshen territory went silent. The words hung in the air of the defense station like a held breath. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Outside, in the black sky above Vera Prime, the Korlath fleet continued closing the distance, their weapons slowly beginning to charge, visible now as faint glowing lights along the edges of their dark ships. The human fleet did not retreat. It did not charge forward either. It simply held its position calm and unmoving, like a wall waiting to see if the coming storm was brave enough to strike first. Director Halvan watched the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. Whatever happened next, whether it brought salvation or disaster, was completely out of his hands now. All he could do, along with every other soul on Vera Prime, was watch and wait, as the two most feared forces on the edge of known space prepared to test each other's limits. The Korlath fleet moved forward like a pack of hunters closing in on wounded prey. Their ships, sharp and dark, spread into an attack formation, one designed to surround, to trap, to leave no escape. For hundreds of years, this formation had worked. Every enemy who faced it had eventually broken, scattered, and fallen. Aboard the Korlath flagship, a massive vessel called the Devourer, Fleet Commander Draxus watched the human ships with narrow, calculating eyes. He was an old warrior, covered in scars from 100 conquered worlds. He had heard the old stories about humans too. Every commander in this part of the galaxy had. But Draxus did not believe in ghost stories. He believed in numbers, in weapons, in raw power, and by every measure he could see, his fleet outnumbered the humans nearly 2-1. "They are not moving," said his second-in-command, a smaller Korlath officer named Fesk. "Perhaps the stories are wrong. Perhaps they are simply waiting to die." Draxus studied the human formation a moment longer. Something about their stillness bothered him. Not the stillness of fear, but the stillness of patience. Predators who were used to being the last ones to move. "Test them," Draxus ordered. "One strike. If they scatter, we finish this quickly. If not..." He paused. "We will know." Aboard the Ashfall, Commander Voss watched the same scene from the opposite side. His officers stood ready at their stations, calm but alert. Lieutenant Mira Chen stood beside him, her hand hovering near the comm panel. "Sir, Korlath weapons are fully charged," she said. "They're going to fire." "Let them," Voss said quietly. "Sir? Hold formation, shields at full power. Do not return fire until I give the order." Mira hesitated, but she trusted her commander. She had served under Voss for 6 years, through 3 border conflicts and 1 full-scale war. She had never once seen him raise his voice, and she had never once seen him lose. Across the black emptiness of space, a bright flash of energy erupted from the Korlath fleet. Dozens of glowing projectiles shot forward, aimed directly at the human formation. On Vera Prime, everyone watching the live feed from the defense station gasped. Director Halvin gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. "They're firing!" Wren shouted. The projectiles struck the human shields in a wave of blinding light. For a moment, the entire screen turned white with the force of the impact. When the light faded, the human fleet was still there, unmoved, unbroken. Shields holding at 94%. A voice reported calmly aboard the Ashfall. "No damage to hull." Draxus, watching from the Devourer, felt a small flicker of unease for the first time. A full volley from his fleet should have caused far more damage than this. Again he ordered, "Full barrage, all ships." Full. This time, every Korlath ship fired at once. The sky above Vera Prime lit up like a second sun, streaks of energy crossing the darkness in every direction, converging on the human fleet in a storm of destructive force. On the ground, people screamed and covered their eyes, though they were too far away to be in any real danger. Kessa held her son tightly, watching through the window as the sky turned bright, then dark again. "Mama, is it over?" her son whispered. "I don't know," she answered honestly. Inside the defense station, the room held its breath as the light faded from the screen. Slowly, the image cleared. The human fleet was still there. A few ships showed minor damage along their outer hulls, small scorch marks and flickers of energy along their shields, but not a single vessel had been destroyed. Not one had even retreated. "Shields at 71% fleet-wide," the report came through. "All ships operational." Wren stared at the screen in disbelief. "They took 2 full volleys and they're still standing." Director Halvin said nothing, but for the first time, a small, cautious flicker of something like awe crossed his tired face. Aboard the Devourer, Fesk turned to Draxus, his confidence clearly shaken. "Commander, that should have crippled half their fleet. Their shields. How are they still functioning?" Draxus did not answer right away. He studied the tactical display, watching the human formation remain perfectly still, perfectly calm, as if the 2 devastating attacks had been nothing more than a light rain. "Human shield technology," Draxus said slowly, "is not something widely shared outside their own space. It seems the stories underestimated them, not exaggerated them." "Do we retreat?" Fesk asked, his voice quieter now. Draxus's pride would not allow such a thought, not yet. He had never retreated from a battle in his life, and he was not ready to become the first Korlath commander in history to flee from a fight before it had truly begun. "No," he said firmly. "Send the strike squadrons. Close-range attack. Overwhelm them with numbers." Dozens of smaller Korlath fighters detached from the main fleet, moving fast and aggressive, spreading out to attack the human ships from multiple angles at once. This was a tactic that had broken many enemy fleets before. Overwhelming numbers, striking from every direction, making it impossible for any defense to hold. Fighters incoming, Mira reported. At least 60, approaching from multiple vectors. Engage defensive turrets, Voss said calmly. Target the fighters only. Do not target the main Korlath fleet yet. Yet, Mira repeated. Voss's expression remained unreadable. They haven't earned that yet. The human ship's defensive systems activated, small automated turrets swiveling with precise mechanical accuracy. As the Korlath fighters closed in, bright bursts of return fire lit up the darkness. But unlike the wild, overwhelming barrage the Korlath had used, the human response was measured, exact, and devastatingly efficient. One by one, the Korlath fighters began to fall. Not in a chaotic explosion of numbers overwhelming a weaker defense, but in a controlled, almost mechanical pattern, as if the humans had faced this exact tactic 100 times before, and had long ago learned precisely how to counter it. On Vera Prime, Ren watched the battle unfold on the screen, his mouth slightly open. They're not even struggling, he muttered. It's like they already know what the Korlath are going to do before they do it. Aboard the Devourer, Draxus watched his fighter squadrons being destroyed one after another, his confidence crumbling with every loss. This was not how battles were supposed to go. His forces outnumbered the enemy, his weapons were powerful, and yet the humans fought with a calm, almost bored efficiency that unsettled him more than any show of aggressive strength ever could. Recall the fighters, he ordered, his voice tighter now. Full fleet advance. All ships converge on their position. Commander, Fesk said carefully, if we commit the entire fleet and this goes wrong, I am aware of the risk, Draxus snapped, but we cannot retreat now, not after this. Advance. The Korlath fleet moved forward as one, all remaining ships converging toward the human formation in a final, overwhelming push. This was the moment meant to end the battle. Total commitment, full force, no more testing. Aboard the Ashfall, Commander Voss watched the approaching wall of Korlath ships with the same steady calm he had shown throughout the entire encounter. Sir, this is their full fleet, Mira said. They're not holding anything back. I know, Voss replied. Orders? Voss was quiet for a long moment, watching the approaching enemy ships fill the tactical display. Then finally he spoke, his voice still calm but carrying a new weight behind it. Now, he said, we remind them why the stars in Threshen territory went silent. What happened next was something none of the officers on Vera Prime, nor Draxus himself, fully understood until it was already over. The human fleet, which had remained still and defensive throughout the entire battle, suddenly shifted formation with startling speed and precision. Ships that had appeared to be simple defensive vessels revealed hidden weapon systems, previously powered down and undetected by Korlath scanners. What had looked like a modest border fleet was, in truth, something far more dangerous, designed specifically to appear weaker than it truly was, until the exact moment it needed to reveal its full strength. Coordinated beams of concentrated energy tore through the Korlath formation with terrifying accuracy, striking not randomly, but with calculated precision. Engines first, disabling ships without necessarily destroying them outright. Weapon systems next, removing the enemy's ability to fight back before removing their ability to survive. It was not a chaotic battle. It was something closer to a demonstration. On Vera Prime, the defense station fell completely silent as everyone watched the screen. Korlath ships, one after another, went dark. Engines failing, weapons offline, drifting helplessly in space. A few, caught in direct fire, broke apart entirely, but even then, the human fleet's precision was unmistakable. This was not a fleet fighting to survive. This was a fleet that had already known, long before the battle began, exactly how it would end. Aboard the Devourer, alarms blared across every system as ship after ship in the Korlath fleet went silent, disabled or destroyed within minutes. Fesk stared at the tactical display in horror. Commander, we're losing the fleet. We're losing it fast. Draxus said nothing. He simply stared at the screen, watching decades of conquest and dominance unravel in front of him in a matter of minutes. "All remaining ships," he finally said, his voice hollow. "Retreat. Immediately." But even as the order was given, more Korlath ships fell dark across the display. The retreat came too late for many of them. On the ground, the people of Vera Prime watched the sky in stunned silence as the battle that had threatened to end their world instead ended with the destruction and disabling of the very fleet that had come to destroy them. Kessa held her son close, both of them staring upward as the flashes of light in the sky slowly faded, replaced by an eerie, uncertain calm. "Mama," her son whispered, "did we win?" Kessa did not answer immediately. She was not entirely sure win was the right word for what she had just witnessed. It did not feel like a celebration. It felt like watching something ancient and terrible finally wake up. Inside the defense station, Director Halvan stood frozen, staring at the now quiet radar screen. The Korlath fleet, the force that had seemed unstoppable just hours ago, was now scattered, broken, retreating in whatever ships still remained functional. Ren turned to him slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, they did it. The humans. They actually did it." Halvan did not respond right away. He was still staring at the screen, replaying in his mind everything he had just witnessed. The patience, the calm, the terrifying precision. He thought of the old stories he had grown up hearing about humans, stories he had always assumed were exaggerated with fear and time. For the first time, he wondered if those old stories had not been exaggerations at all. They had been warnings. Silence fell over Vera Prime. For the first time in nearly a week, no alarms rang through the capital city. No warning lights flashed across the defense station. The sky above the planet, which had been filled with fire and fear just hours earlier, was now empty except for the slow, steady movement of the human fleet as it repositioned itself in orbit. Director Halvan stood at the window of the control room, watching the quiet sky. His body felt heavy with exhaustion, but his mind was still racing, still trying to process everything that had happened. "Sir," Ren said softly, stepping up beside him, "the Korlath fleet is gone. What's left of it, anyway." Halvan nodded slowly. "And the human fleet?" "Holding position," Ren replied. "They haven't moved. They haven't said anything since the battle ended." Halvan took a deep breath. Whatever relief he felt was mixed with something else, a heavy, uncertain feeling he could not quite name. His planet was safe, but at what cost had that safety come? What exactly had they invited into their skies to save them? He walked back to the communication console and opened a channel to the human fleet. "Commander Voss," he said, his voice quiet. "This is Director Halvan. Are you and your people all right?" There was a brief pause before the familiar, calm voice answered. "We are fine, Director. Minor damage to a few ships. No casualties on our side." Halvan closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over him. "Thank you. Thank you for what you did. I don't know how we can ever repay you." "You don't need to repay us," Voss replied simply. "You asked for help. We gave it. That is all this was." Halvan hesitated before asking the question that had been sitting heavy in his chest since the battle ended. "Commander, what you did to that fleet, it wasn't just victory. It was..." He struggled to find the right word. "Complete." There was a pause on the line, longer this time. "The Korlath understand only strength," Voss finally said. "If we had shown mercy too early, they would have seen it as weakness, and they would have returned, to you or to someone else's world, just as helpless as yours. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for the future is make sure the threat does not come back." Halvan did not respond immediately. It was not the answer he had expected, but somehow it made a strange kind of sense. Down in the capital city, the streets that had been filled with fear and panic just a day earlier were now filled with something different. A fragile, uncertain sense of relief. People stepped outside their homes slowly, looking up at the sky as if they still could not quite believe it was safe to do so. Kessa stood outside her home with her son, watching the distant human ships hover peacefully above the planet. Her son tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, are they going to leave now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe. Maybe not yet." As if answering her thoughts, a small transport shuttle broke away from the main human fleet and began descending toward the capital city. Word spread quickly. The humans were sending a small group down to meet with Vera Prime's leadership directly. The shuttle landed gently in the central square of the capital, its engines quieting as the ramp lowered. A small group of soldiers stepped out, led by a tall man in a dark uniform. Director Halvin, along with a small group of officials, walked forward to meet them. Up close, the humans did not look like monsters. They did not look like the terrifying beings from old stories. They looked simply like people, tired, careful, watching their surroundings with the quiet alertness of soldiers who had seen too much conflict in their lives. Commander Voss stepped forward, extending a hand toward Director Halvin. A human gesture that Halvin did not fully understand, but accepted anyway, shaking it carefully. "Director Halvin," Voss said, "it's good to finally meet you in person." "Commander Voss," Halvin replied, his voice still slightly unsteady. "Thank you. For everything." Voss glanced around at the gathered crowd of Varans, many of whom watched the humans with a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. "Your people are safe now," he said. "The remaining Korlath forces have retreated far beyond your borders. It will be a long time, if ever, before they consider returning to this system." "Because of what you did to their fleet," Halvin said quietly. "Because of what they saw," Voss corrected gently. "Fear can be a powerful deterrent, Director, sometimes more powerful than any treaty." Among the small crowd gathered in the square, a young Varan soldier named Talus stood watching the human soldiers carefully. He had lost his older brother 2 years earlier in a pirate raid on a neighboring colony, a raid that had gone unanswered by any larger power, leaving his family with nothing but grief and unresolved anger. Talus stepped forward hesitantly, catching the attention of one of the younger human soldiers standing near the shuttle, a woman with tired eyes and a calm, patient expression. "Excuse me," Talus said carefully. "Can I ask you something?" The soldier, whose name patch read Chen, turned to him with a small understanding nod. "Of course." "Why did you come?" Talus asked. "Really, not the official reason, the real one." Mira Chen was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. "Because someone asked," she finally said. "That's usually enough for us." "But you didn't know us," Talus pressed. "You didn't know if we were worth saving. You didn't know if this would cost human lives." Mira's expression softened slightly. "I lost people in battles like this before," she admitted. "Border conflicts most of the galaxy never hears about. Every time I ask myself if it's worth it." She glanced toward the quiet crowd of Varans around them. Families, children, elderly people who had spent days believing they would not survive the week. "Every time watching people like this get to go home, it's worth it." Talus looked down for a moment, his earlier bitterness softened by an emotion he had not expected to feel today, something close to comfort. "My brother," he said quietly. "He died because no one answered when we called for help. Not like this." Mira's expression grew gentle. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "That shouldn't have happened to him." Talus nodded slowly, blinking back unexpected tears. It did not undo his loss. Nothing could undo that. But somehow, standing here now, watching his own people finally receive the help his brother never had, felt like something meaningful, a strange, quiet comfort that eased just a small part of an old wound. Over the following days, human engineers assisted Vera Prime in repairing minor damage caused during the brief conflict, while medical teams checked on injured Varans who had been hurt during the panic of evacuation. The humans did not ask for payment. They did not demand resources or territory in exchange for their help. They simply completed the tasks in front of them with quiet efficiency, then prepared their fleet to depart. On the final day before the human fleet's departure, Director Halvin met with Commander Voss one last time, standing together on a balcony overlooking the recovering capital city. "You'll be leaving soon," Halvan said. "Yes," Voss replied. "Our fleet has other responsibilities, other borders to watch." "Will you remember us?" Halvan asked. "Once you're gone, will this just become another mission in your records?" Voss considered the question carefully before answering. "We remember every world we've helped, Director. Not because we need thanks, but because remembering is how we make sure the next call for help is answered as quickly as this one was." Halvan nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of those words. "I used to believe the stories about your people," he admitted. "Stories about monsters, about a species too dangerous to approach. I understand now that those stories were incomplete." Voss offered a small, tired smile. "Every story is incomplete, Director. The Korlath saw a fleet that destroyed them without mercy. Your people saw a fleet that saved them without asking for anything in return. Both of those things happened. Both are true." As the human fleet prepared to depart, word of what had happened at Vera Prime began to spread far beyond its own small system. Trade ships passing through neighboring systems carried the story to other worlds, a small, defenseless planet, saved from a powerful Korlath fleet by a small force of humans who had answered a single desperate call for help. The story grew with every retelling, as stories often do. Some versions exaggerated the scale of the battle. Others exaggerated the mercy shown to the survivors. But at the core of every version remained the same simple truth. Humanity, a species so many had learned to fear and avoid, had answered a cry for help from a world it owed nothing to, and had done so without hesitation. In distant corners of the galaxy, other small, vulnerable species began to whisper a new kind of story. Not one of fear, but of quiet, cautious hope. A story suggesting that perhaps, if the worst ever happened to their own world, they too might have somewhere to send a message. Someone who might actually answer. But in other corners of the galaxy, among older, more dangerous empires who had heard the story of the Korlath fleet's destruction, a different kind of whisper began to spread. A quiet unease among commanders who had once considered expanding their reach into smaller, unclaimed systems. Word of Vera Prime reached even the farthest edges of known space, carried between merchants and travelers, growing with each retelling. And in one distant system, far beyond the borders most species dared to map, something old and powerful took quiet notice of the name now spreading across the stars, something that had not concerned itself with the small conflicts of lesser empires in a very long time. Something that was, for the first time in years, mildly curious about what humanity had become. Far beyond the borders of any charted empire, past systems that no trade route had ever touched, there existed a region of space that most star maps simply labeled as empty. Not unexplored. Empty. A place where ships that entered rarely sent word back, and where even the boldest explorers eventually turned away, following instincts they could not fully explain. Within this region, on a world with no official name, something ancient stirred. It had been a long time since anything in the wider galaxy had drawn its attention. Empires rose and fell. Wars were fought and forgotten. Species discovered the stars, spread across them, and sometimes disappeared entirely. All of this had happened many times before, and all of it had passed without concern. But the name now spreading across trade routes and diplomatic channels, human, was not entirely unfamiliar. In a quiet, dimly lit chamber deep beneath the surface of this nameless world, a figure sat motionless before a wide, curved screen, showing fragments of information gathered from 1,000 distant sources. Trade conversations, diplomatic reports, old star charts, and now a growing number of messages describing the destruction of a Korlath fleet at the hands of a small human force. The figure was tall, its form partly hidden in shadow, its exact shape difficult to describe in any single word. It had watched the galaxy for longer than any recorded civilization had existed. It rarely spoke. It rarely acted. Mostly, it watched. Beside it stood a smaller assistant, a construct built specifically to serve as its voice when needed. The assistant's optical sensors flickered as it processed the same reports. You wish to review the human file again? The assistant said. It was not quite a question. Yes, the figure replied. Its voice was low, quiet, carrying a weight that seemed to come from centuries rather than simple age. Show me the full record. The screen shifted, displaying old, faded information, the earliest known reports about humanity, gathered from the time of the Threshen War. Grainy images of scattered battles, fragmented reports of a small, technologically unremarkable species somehow enduring against overwhelming odds. This file has remained unchanged for many years, the assistant noted. Humanity's activity beyond their own borders has been minimal since the fall of the Threshen Dominion. Until now, the figure said. Until now, the assistant agreed. Shall I update the file with recent events? The figure was quiet for a long moment, studying the old records with something that might have been curiosity, or might have been something closer to caution. Humanity was contained once, it said finally, not by choice, by circumstance. They stayed within their borders because they had no reason to leave them. And now they have crossed into unclaimed territory to defend a species with no connection to them, the assistant said, without request for payment or territory. Yes, the figure said. Is this significant? The figure considered the question carefully before answering. A species that expands for conquest is predictable. A species that expands for resources is predictable. But a species that begins to act simply because it believes it should. It paused. That is far more difficult to predict. Meanwhile, back in known space, the story of Vera Prime's rescue continued to spread, reaching further with each passing week. On dozens of small, vulnerable worlds throughout the galaxy, people who had once lived in quiet fear of larger powers began to speak, cautiously, about the possibility of a new kind of hope. On a modest agricultural colony 3 systems away from Vera Prime, a young farmer named Joras sat with his family around a small kitchen table, listening to a merchant retelling the story of the battle for perhaps the 10th time that month. They say the humans destroyed nearly the entire Korlath fleet without losing a single ship, the merchant said, clearly enjoying the attention of his small audience. Not one ship lost, and they asked for nothing in return. Joras's younger sister, only 12 years old, listened with wide eyes. Do you think they'd come here if we ever needed help? The merchant shrugged. Who knows? But it's good to know someone might answer, isn't it? Joras's father, an older man who had lived through 2 smaller pirate raids in his lifetime, said nothing, but his expression carried a complicated mixture of relief and unease. Hope, he had learned over the years, could sometimes be dangerous, especially hope placed in a species so poorly understood by the rest of the galaxy. Still, that night, as his family prepared for bed, Joras noticed his father quietly writing down a set of coordinates and frequencies on a small piece of paper, folding it carefully and placing it in a drawer beside the family's old communicator. Just in case, not everyone who heard the story reacted with hope. In the scattered remnants of Korlath territory, the survivors of the destroyed fleet returned home, carrying reports that spread fear and confusion among their own commanders. In a heavily fortified command center on the Korlath homeworld, Fleet Commander Draxus stood before a council of senior military leaders, forced to explain the loss of nearly his entire fleet. You are telling us, said one elder commander, his voice sharp with disbelief, that a force half the size of ours destroyed us without losing a single ship? Yes, Draxus admitted, his pride bruised but his honesty unwavering. Their technology, their tactics, everything we believed we understood about their capabilities was wrong. Whatever restraint they've shown in previous decades, whatever quiet withdrawal we assumed meant weakness, it was never weakness. It was patience. The council chamber fell into uneasy silence. What do you recommend? Another commander asked. Draxus considered his answer carefully before speaking. I recommend we leave their borders and any world under their protection entirely alone, whatever the cost to our pride. It is smaller than the cost of testing them again. Not every commander in the room agreed easily, but the images and reports from the battle were difficult to dismiss. For the first time in generations, The Korlath Empire began quietly redrawing its expansion plans, avoiding not just human space, but any system where humans had shown even the slightest presence or interest. Back on Vera Prime, life slowly began returning to a new kind of normal. The physical damage from the brief conflict was repaired within weeks, but the emotional impact remained, woven quietly into the fabric of daily life. Streets that had once felt safe now carried memories of fear and uncertainty, but also memories of a hope that had arrived just when it was needed most. Director Halvin, sitting in his office one evening, reviewed reports of the ongoing recovery efforts, occasionally pausing to look out his window at the calm night sky above the city, a sky that had once again returned to its usual quiet peace. Wren entered the office quietly, carrying a small datapad. "Sir, we've received a message. It's from Commander Voss." Halvin looked up, curious. "What does it say?" Wren read aloud. "Director Halvin, our fleet has moved on to other responsibilities along the border, but we remain within reasonable range should Vera Prime require assistance in the future. Rebuild well. You have earned the chance to." Halvin allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Send a reply," he said. Tell him we intend to." Far beyond the reach of any known star chart, in the quiet chamber where the ancient figure continued its careful observation of the galaxy's shifting balance, the assistant construct offered one final question before ending its report for the day. "Will you take action regarding humanity?" it asked. "Contact, observation, intervention?" The figure was silent for a long moment, watching the flickering data still scrolling quietly across the wide screen before it. "Not yet," it finally said. "Humanity has only just begun to remember what they are capable of. Let them grow into that understanding a little longer. And after that?" The figure's shadowed form shifted slightly, its voice carrying a quiet weight that suggested centuries of patience yet remaining. "After that," it said, "we will see if they remain the species that answered a cry for help, or if power changes them, as it has changed so many others before them." The screen dimmed slowly, the chamber falling back into quiet darkness, as somewhere far across the galaxy, humanity's name continued to spread quietly among the stars, remembered now not only as a warning, but as a promise.